Ровно в 12 и за нами будет разбит.
Здравствуйте, коллеги.
Dear colleagues, we are glad to welcome you to our virtual meeting devoted to Ars Electronica Festival. As you know, Ars Electronica is a festival that annually takes place in Linz, Austria, which brings together new media, science, technology, art, and discussions about all these things. However, thanks to coronavirus or despite the coronavirus, the Art Electronica Festival went beyond the borders of Austria, and now it is taking place in different countries of the world. So we join to discuss different topics that are about our technological existence. Some words about the festival. There are different geographical divisions, and every geographical division is called a garden. This is a metaphor that defines ecosystems surrounding people, artists who come together to discuss these things. This year, Ars Electronica Festival displays 7 exhibitions that were made by High School of Economics students and designers, and you can watch them at a special website devoted to this.
Нет, в смысле, эхо, пожалуйста, это прям ужас какой. Это от Риты, я так полагаю, это у меня микрофон, скорее всего, включен. Итак, наш круглый стол сегодня объединяет специалистов.
Our round table has brought together experts who are dealing with arts, game design, game studies, digital art, contemporary art, and other modern practices that it is important to discuss in the context of the new digital deal. This is the topic, the leading topic for Ars Electronica Festival. So let me introduce briefly the participants of today's roundtable. So we start with Margarita Kuleva, who is an art sociologist. She has a PhD in sociology. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology, and she's the head of the Design and Contemporary Art Department in the Higher School of Economics in St. Petersburg, and she works on the Center of German and European Studies in St. Petersburg State University and Bielefeld. She's the holder of fellowship of the Boston Center for Arts Design and Social Research. Then we move on to Mr. Stanislav Shuripa, who is an artist, curator, critic, contemporary art theorist, and principal of the Joseph Backstein Institute of Contemporary Art. Now we move on to Mr. Maxim Miroshnichenko. He studies cybernetics and post-cognitivism. He has a Telegram channel called Affordable Affordance. He works in the Politav Institute for Theoretical and Historical Studies in the Humanities, and he is the holder of Alexander Piatigorsky Foundation Fellowship. Then Nikolai Dubovsky, game designer, the head of the I Speak Lord Studio and curator of the game design and virtual reality profile in the HSE School of Design, and Denis Yepifantsev, who is a writer, head of the CIS Deloitte Information Design Group and the author of the Philosophy Design course in the HSE School of Design, a member of shortlisting panel of the National Bestseller Awards in 2020-2021, and I am Alexandra Persheva. I have a PhD in art history. I'm assistant professor of the HSE School of Design and screen arts expert. So today we're talking about the new deal. It's a new methods of thinking culturally that we have faced thanks to digital transformation or despite technological transformation. And the questions that I would like to discuss with you are as follows. For example, How do you see this technological transformation or digital transformation? Does it exist? Do we have indeed this new digital deal? What do the media give us? It is quite an interesting question, and there can be different answers to it, depending on what angle you take. Indeed, if we look at the modern history, beginning from the 90s, when the public started to feel the results of the digital revolution, the expectations, the utopian expectations that we had looking at the internet and digital realities, they just faded away, so to say. If we look back at what we had in the 1990s, actually we faced the turbulent development of the internet, and everyone expected something from the internet. Everyone thought that we would communicate via thoughts. There would be a global communicative village. Everyone would be equal, and the internet structure of the 1990s, which included different archipelagos of startups or republics, just drove us to this idea, and dot-com crisis that happened in the 1990s, that was the crisis of the first internet model, led to the world that we have found ourselves in, that have existed over the past 2 decades. This is a world of big types of worlds that define the internet and digital realities. This situation is called in different ways. There is the capitalism of control or monitoring, the capitalism of tracing. And one of the authors devoted her bestseller to this very topic. She shows how the growth of big corporations have resulted in the fact that now different devices are learning from the people. They feed on the data, and she calls the situation unprecedented, the big letter unprecedented. And some futurologists call it singularity, when the machines and devices will start to learn what we do not know, and probably there will be no computer geeks, and people will exalt what different devices will be doing, and they will respond to them in their own language. And the capitalism of tracing defines and describes such realities. And over the past years, since the second part of 2010, so everything is developing very fast, even faster than expected. And I'm recalling the discussions we used to have 10 years ago, and we thought back then that there would be no vehicles that men do not drive. So self-driven cars, there won't be computers and robots that do fantastic things. And in fact, the changes that we have expected turn out to be different. They take different levels of reality that we used to expect them,
пришествие и распространение такого broadband,
and the
широкополосного мобильного интернета, оно
broadband
действительно очень резко меняет
internet and mobile internet changes the structure of people-to-people relations and the distribution of power in societies, and it changes what people feel, their identities, their individuality. Individuum, by the way, is translated as undivided from the Latin, so the fact that the identity of a human person has changed. It now looks like a cloud, a cluster of networks. We have ceased to be the Cartesian subjects centered around some inner world, the soul, something that should be inside a new human being. Our attention is distributed between different gadgets and devices, a means of communication. We are just a number of networks that can or cannot cross, and me or I turns into I/we, so it is the conscience that is both individual and collective, and it will develop like that in the future, but at the same time deep social structures will also evolve, the private and the public, and we can see it now quite clearly. I mean, the border between the private and the public ceases to exist, becomes senseless, and the inner world and the outside world turn out to be connected, like the Möbius wave. You go down into the introspect and you find others inside you as well, and others, not just they, it's you. So it is about individual and collective existence. And the digital technologies does not eliminate the traditional practices or art. It does exist, it does not take a central place, but still we have photography, for example. If we say a few words about art, for example, digital technologies do bring changes, but these are indirect changes. They change the structures of institutions, the interaction between people, and now artists believe that research is one of the centerpieces. It's one of the things that bring together different disciplines and methods. It draws upon the methodological collage, or something that we can call the democracy of experience, when it is not only my experience, but it is experience of those for whom I do my work and who look at my work. The experience of anything is as valuable as my experience as author is. So the democracy of experience, or this methodological diversity, these factors are connected with the changes, including social and psychological, that I have tried to explain. So, in a nutshell, beyond debate, the changes do take place, and by and large they are happening fast. They're more radical than we have expected, but the way we can see them differs. And what we notice or do not notice depends on how we perceive ourselves within the cultural and social space. Okay, thank you. I would like to grasp upon these words that you've said. In order to tell someone something about the large-scale changes, we need to understand what our viewpoint is. And now let us ask Ms. Margarita Kuleva, who has taken a sociological position. So she looks at things from the point of view of studying society, authorities, communication, and different transformations within the social space. Hopefully, we will be able to see her. Yes, I can see myself and I can hear myself too. So hello, I'm speaking from my flat, from the kitchen in St. Petersburg. It's quite interesting that once you are watching the show and next second you understand that you can see yourself speaking from the kitchen. So it is about the garden, the garden pavilion, and I am a sociologist and I'm interested in arts and digital space. I'm interested in whether the AI can do something that resembles art. This is actually not what I'm well versed in, but I am interested in the society, in whether the artists will be able to interact in the world freely and equitably, or we will face the world of new inequality. I have a presentation, and by the way, I'm always thinking about the questions that you have spoken about, and I would like to speak about them through the prism of two projects that I have been working on during the pandemic. Hopefully you can see the presentation. It is a short metaphor to define and present my point of view. It was created back in the 1970s by Michael Asher for one of Los Angeles galleries. That was not a classical exhibition. He just took a wall. Can you see my presentation? I can see only myself. You know, we've lost it. We have just had Asher on the screen, but now we can see only you. Well, it's not right. It's probably the new reality of our media. So we are waiting for the presentation to appear. Yeah, here it is. So we're back to Mr. Asher. So what he did, he just removed the wall between what we can see as people who watch something and the invisible actors of art who deal with some routine things that quite few people know about. And I'm in the process of mental thinking all the time, and it seems to me that there is a reference to this very Michael Asher's work. And I'm going to speak about the transformations both online and offline. First, it's a media object and a project that we have done together with Viktor Kudryashov that is called The Privilege of Presence. And I wrote a thing about what is happening to us. It was in May 2020. That was part of Garage Museum exhibition about reflection, and I suggest that we should look at the transformation that has happened to us, not like some global transformation or entry into a new world. I would like to see it as a researcher's experience in order to understand better what world we used to have and what structures it used to have. And it seems to me that we cannot see the presentation. Okay, that's fine. So together with Viktor Kudryshov, who was in charge of making this object, and by the way, all institutions, museums were closed, so it was put into a shabby white cube, so to say, in the Bertholds Center, and this was an interactive object. So as soon as one person who was the representative of the Garage Museum, so as soon as this person headed over to this Garage website, one of the parts of this word became green, and everyone could see it online because it was a webcast. And so we tried to, and this is by the way us, so we tried to flag up the elimination of borders both online and offline. So we tried to describe what was happening with art, and in brief,
briefly, I can just repeat. If you want to elaborate on that a little bit more, you can just read my essay. But I believe that I should mention some important viewpoints, and those are connected to the fact that technologies and digitalization in the field of art and museums has been discussed for more than 20 years. And speaking conceptually, we've been ready for that quite long ago, but it just happened overnight. And the question here is what we lost, actually. And perhaps this is not the opportunity that we can't view art anymore. No, that's not that, because here we can now see, due to also Ars Electronica, that art is not only a physical object, and there are a lot of different examples that exist on the internet as just a natural environment. That's okay. But what we lose here is the meeting point and the interconnection between formal and informal fields of art. And these are very important for those who represent this community. And perhaps also what we are getting at the same time is indeed the opportunity, with the help of contemporary platforms such as TikTok, for example, and there are some also very nice examples of some English museums that just have become stars during the pandemic. And so here, perhaps we just grant some more opportunities to institutions, those institutions who didn't have these opportunities in the past. And so this is about the transition from offline to online. And now I'd like to mention my second project. Also, I did it in 2020, to be more exact, in December. This was an both offline and online workshop, and it took place in Istanbul. So this was a hub where it could have happened indeed and could have taken place, and it did. And very nice to say that the representatives of the School of Design and the School of Media of HSE University took part in that. Also, Gleb took part in that. It was very nice. And what we discussed there was the kind of a paradoxical situation that we found ourselves in, speaking from the traditional prospect of your future. the one that we mentioned quite a lot. And the concept that I've come up with and which I continue to develop is called no future institution. So the main meaning here is that not only due to COVID and this very fast digitalization that just happened overnight, but also due to the fact that the cultural institutions is the institute or body of the public field that should be at the front line of the public discussion. And those social institutions that are responsible for the contemporary times. And when it comes to the digitalization, well, actually, we are already in the future when it comes to arts. But any staff member of a museum, perhaps, as well as any staff member of an education field, would probably say that currently we are living in a situation without the future, because the situation with the coronavirus and many other ones just deprive us of the opportunity to plan. And you can see this example, and this is connected to Moscow. The largest art exhibition and art fair that was just postponed just 1 week before the opening. It should have become an international one, and it was kind of it used to be kind of a scandal, this kind of situation in the past. But today we see that these global events take place in such a format that it can take place, or it can just be cancelled, or it can be removed to some other format. And perhaps this situation of global uncertainty can add also to the global uncertainty that happened back in 1990s that were described by Puller and Harvey and many other philosophers and social scientists. But what I see here is kind of an optimism, sign of optimism, because this situation of no future, how I call it, is the situation that allows us to go beyond the cycle of lofty neoliberal efficiency. And without the coronavirus, probably we would already know what we would do in 2023. And this is one of the objects of thoughts of the participants of our workshop. And perhaps the last issue that I wanted to raise, and then to probably yield the floor to some other speakers. If we talk about the new digital deal, so the question is, do we actually have the deal? Do we have kind of a deal here? And the example here, it's not a project completely, but it's just a real life in which we live. And I believe that it's more of an inspiration for us than our projects or the projects of other people's. And so here you can see a taxi driver, and he was just driving me in St. Petersburg. I was going to one of my lectures of No Future. So the ride took us quite a long time because the museum was quite far away. And, the ride took us 30 minutes, and he asked me to just give him my lecture. And I tried to express the concept, tried to describe the future, the prospects, etc. And he asked me, Margarita, and actually it was me who asked him. So I asked him, what do you think about the future? And he said, well, I don't completely like it. I would like to find something better than the future that is ahead of me. And I believe that this is quite a question of the changes in these prospects of the contemporary times, and me and Shukrola would like to leave you with that. Thank you, Margarita. Indeed, this is a question that we pose to ourselves quite often, and if we go back to the times of avant-garde and other times, there was the world with different phases, which we could go through, which we could feel the moment, etc. At those times, it was quite interesting and weird at the same time, because we were constantly talking about the future, we were constantly jumping ahead, but now there is nowhere to jump for us anymore. And so, Stanislav, what do you think? If we go back to this concept of no future, when it comes to the culture and arts, is there a feeling of just here and now, and the feeling that who knows what would happen tomorrow and the day after tomorrow? Well, to answer to that, Alexander, I believe you are right, because everybody who is somehow is connected to the contemporary culture, perhaps we know this feeling, and it wasn't born yesterday or even today. This is the social and cultural or political and economic form in which we live. We can call it or just the capitalism of platforms, and many other terms can be used in here. And so here, this is about our now, our reality, and the present is much actually richer than the present that was there like 100 years ago. So those times there were some just dirty paddles and the carriages, the horses, etc. And so visionaries and such as Henry Ford, for example, a lot of people believe him to be the main artist of the 20th century, even more important than Andy Warhol. And of course, they were attracted to future. Very attractive and very dangerous vision of the future. And in our present, here and now, we see absolutely different versions of the past. The versions of the past that already been thought through, also those versions that we dreamed about but were never brought to life, also some hopes that were just forgotten, some dreams abandoned, some experience that wasn't lived through, some versions of the future that never became the reality. Our present is full of these versions, and I believe that the mass culture as well as the cultural industry are working with these versions quite successfully. And to add to that, there are some very popular mottos, such as "Make something great again," America or whatever. All they tell us about this feeling of presence of different versions of the future, some phantom memory or real memories. This is another question. So on the one hand, our new future is our past. It could be put like that, because the past continues to discover itself in different aspects. A lot of people are attracted to this version of the past or another one, and they perceive it as fresh version of the future, and it was perceived by the people during the era of modernity. But on the other hand, the future of technologies is not also a future. The future that can be calculated is not a future, actually. This is just the continuation of the present. And so, as far as I see it, and what I also perceive in different artistic practices, this is also mentioned by a lot of contemporary authors. Perhaps, by and large, this is the future that is unprecedented. I've already mentioned the book of Shoshana Zuboff, and this book is about it starts with a fire that happened in a house. It happens, and she just runs to collect some valuables, some documents, etc. And when she sees how the fire spreads in the house, she just started to close the doors on the second floor to protect her library and some valuables from the fire. And when she closed the doors and she thought that she saved everything, then she went out. And when it happened, when she was out, her house just exploded. So there could be some kind of boiler or anything else. And for her, that case from her personal biography was kind of a symbol of unprecedented. Perhaps we are trying to close the doors when the whole house will just explode in a couple of seconds.
как мне кажется,
And so, as far as I believe, the future in our times is turning to us
показывается как подлинное будущее, то,
with the unknown
чем мы
side,
довольны
and this is unprecedented, and we are just helpless in front of that, and it's actually also very interesting. Yes, and we have to live with that. Right, thank you very much. And now I believe that from this point it would be quite good to start to talk about the experience. Margarita and you also touched upon that already. Experience as a way to interact with the world, to perceive it, to try to live through something that is just unimaginable for us. And now I'd like to give the floor to Nikolai as an expert in the field of the generation of different ways of experience. Since you are a game designer, you create environments, spaces, platforms, algorithms, and conditions. Against all of this, a player can just face very unpredictable circumstances. And so, how do you perceive the future, and how do we have to deal with it? Well, to answer to that, when we talk about games, we don't mention digital games in here, because this is just one form of numerous forms of the games. So when we start to talk about it, we face two very important problems that are quite inherent in games. The first problem here is that a game is a simulation. Any game is like that. And so the work Homo Ludus, very important one, the author touched upon this issue in that work, and this is also quite good ground for our discussion, because here we can question some statements, and we can also draw the example from some games that are not simulations. So there is no transfer of some practical activities that we know in the real life. We don't transfer these activities to the game or a game. But when a person starts to play a game, this person clearly understands that there was something before the game, and now this is the space of the game. And it is characterized by absolutely different rules and laws, and they're quite different from the reality. So a game is a very safe zone, but sometimes there could be not very familiar practices, or sometimes even some dangerous practices. We can also go back to the history in here, because children can hunt, can play hunting, they can play some battles, and in game they can just learn some things that are quite dangerous in the real life. And here we see the emergence of a very important zone, the legalized irresponsibility. I will elaborate on the future a bit more later. This is just a long introduction, but I have to put it like that. And so these perceived irresponsibility, well, when we talk about the absence of responsibility, this connotation here is quite negative. But here I'm talking about some source of joy and happiness, as well as pleasure that we get when we just switch from our real life and start to conduct some activities in a game. So let's just remember this important aspect. The second important issue here is that a game as a semiotic system, well, we have a lot of different semiotic systems in our life, and we do understand that if we remember Sur and Bartes, they said that everything is semiotics, so we will not touch upon that right now. But the semiotic character of a game is just outstanding, because a game is a simulation to quite an extent, and it just shouts out that this is not an activity, but this is a symbol of some activity. And the values that you use in a game, this is the battle for some prizes. And those are not the real prizes, but they are some symbols of the prizes, some references. And so the semiotic character of a game in here is quite a very clear one, ostentatious, so to say. And a denotate here is valuable by itself, and this is an aspect that is understood by a player. And now let's talk about how games play with the idea of the future. So if we don't talk about the future as just some fantasy, a fantastic way of our hypothesis, how it all will develop. For example, I just mentioned that children can play hunting. When they can't even speak, they can start playing and they build some model of the future. This is about the reality. First, you learn to live in this reality in the form of a game, and this future comes to a game with a value. And this is the main goal of the game itself. And so we can say here that games and the future is, or other terms that are interconnected and they cannot do without each other.
However, we do understand that they are different, and if my colleagues are here, they could have said that I'm exaggerating. But still, so let us look how to deal with the two basic aspects of every game. I can just say that the modeling of the future is a potential threat of losing the reality, which is, however attractive it is. And I would like to point out that we're speaking about video games. As Stanislav said, there was a period in the 1990s and in the noughties when game designers made fantastic games that were so real, like reality. And it seemed that that was indeed the task, the objective of the game designers, to simulate, to imitate the reality, to make it true. But quite soon they understood that their thoughts that they used to have when they were children do not work, and it became clear that it was hard to achieve technologically, and it is at the same time not quite necessary. And now, suddenly, just look what we are seeing, for example, in the HSE lab. We have the following. So when we understood that the game will replace the reality, we understood that the people playing games do not need that. And we've got the question, what models of reality and what values of reality make us forget about our routine, about our daily life, and spend every day playing games. This is the case, for example, in different online games which have become quite popular. And it turns out that the game designers face the crisis of values because for a person playing games to understand this is a simulation. This is something that mimics the reality that we can have in the prospect. For example, a game with an alternative type of time. For example, a game with a discrete time. Time can be sold, time can be exchanged. For us, in real life, it's hard to imagine, but the game does this. it can allow us to try to feel oneself within this discrete time, and we do it, we test something dangerous, something destructive. So when game creators thought that they wanted people to believe in these models, and they became upset, they became expensive, and then we faced the problem of values. And going back to the topic of our discussion, I have been speaking for quite long, and now I would like to say that suddenly we have understood, we have come to understand it, that these values have correlated with the boundaries that are defined by our bodies, our eyesight, our feelings, our memories, the whole systems that we have inside our bodies. So now we are thinking about how to make these models more true, more tangible. So despite the fact that I have this suspension of disbelief and I take it irresponsibly, and by the way, this suspension of disbelief is stronger here while playing the game. So suddenly it turned out that through the body language, through the boundaries, through the responses, through the different movements of our fingers, as soon as we realize what our bodies are doing, well, it happens. By the way, quite recently I've been to the Vladivostok Federal University, and I participated in the discussion of neurologists. That was one of the most productive discussions about the future of game design. And it set horizons, goals and objectives for the game designers. So it turned out that neurophysiologists together with game designers have started to solve the same problems. So how the boundaries of our perceptions, so different limitations during decision making, for example, during making decisions that turn out to be right or wrong. So all values during simulations can become more valuable if they are perceived by those people who play games. And in this case, the simulation becomes more valuable. And there is a distance between a game player and the game, and this responsibility becomes higher, and this intended irresponsibility of a person who plays games becomes more interesting. So I'm finishing now, and so different thoughts about digitalization, depersonalization that we can be afraid of when we divert attentions to different devices and methods of communications, lead us to decentralized behavior when one and the same person uses different masks at the stage, becoming different human beings. So this cannot be so closely connected with digitalization because we used to have it, we have worked it through, but our bodies will stay with us forever, and to that extent that our bodies remain important to us, as soon as the irresponsibility becomes higher, testing new models of the future, I believe, well, it is it is something that we exaggerate. It's not that dangerous. We indeed are afraid of new digital forms replacing art and traditional practices. I believe that's too much. We are still human beings as soon as till we perceive ourselves as human beings. Thank you. Thank you, Nikolai. I'm still a little bit concerned with the fact that human beings are too human, and he or she brings this humanness into the digital space, which connects us all together, as Stanislav has mentioned. We correlate ourselves with others, and it can affect media character and the body itself. And it is vividly illustrated by different phenomena that have emerged recently in the communication platform space. And it seems to me that now we will give the floor to Denis, because he specializes in what stories we tell each other about people, about the world. It seems to me that I'm going to say some of the things that my colleagues have already said. I have a presentation which is about the synthetic narrative and the cancel culture. There was a research conducted by Pew Research that was held in 2020. It was about cancel culture. So if we speak about something, we have to define it. It is quite a new phenomenon. It is not quite clear what it is. I have taken two graphs and I would like to draw your attention to them. First, have you heard about the cancel culture? And I decided to show you the age of people who have heard about cancel culture notion. And you can see here that people aged 18, 20 know what it is. They will grow up with this notion in their heads. And then if those people who were asked this question, they then have had to say whether they understood it or not and what it meant. And such terms, such notions as a method to counter racism or sexism, and different notions were brought up. And people knew how this generation transition is built, and the second graph shows this, and the cancel culture as any other complex phenomenon brings all these things together. It is a form of censorship, it's a form of rewriting history, it's quite evil, malicious attacks, and many other things. And we can see how these things are distributed between different age groups. Next slide, please. When we read about cancel culture on different media, they speak about specific cases like Joan Rowling, Kevin Spacey, Regina Todorenko, or like Victoria's Secret campaign, for example. And cancel culture is described as a boycott, as a protest at a new technological level. So we used to carry banners, take down the streets, and now we put down hashtag something. But there are some cases that are related to the cancel culture. So why do we pay attention to Joan Rowling? It's a human being. She does have emotions. We either sympathize with her or not, dependent on what we think about the beautiful. But there are some cases that face slow going. They are not connected with a person, and they will be about the future. The next slide, I will speak about two cases. First, why are there so many naked women in our museums? The feminist rhetoric connected to this question attacks modern museums. Feminism is not a set of some points of view. It is a set of different discourses, and when a curator thinks about an exhibition, he understands that people can come and ask why are you going to display naked women? Is it for optics or what is it all about? We find ourselves in a world where we won't see naked women. It's not because they are not beautiful, but because it is less dangerous. And the second case is even more interesting. This happened a couple of years ago. When I tried to find the link, I failed, but it turned out that it is not the only case, and it is connected with higher education facilities. It seems to me it was Oxford University that claimed that they were going to revisit the world literature course, so they abandoned the one they used to have, which was quite good, and they switch over to a more multicultural course, taking away dead white men, replacing them with the authors hailing from Africa or Asia. And I have Googled it, and both Cambridge and Oxford and many other universities have already revisited the courses about literature or history or art, and the students who will grow up with this in mind will form the public opinion. It will be a different world. We have found ourselves in a situation when the future has already come. It's like a tram. We won't be able to change our course. And it seems to me that these two cases are very important, and I would like to show to you how this mechanism works and what I am interested in. Next slide, please. So people who are well up in the games are going to beat me. It's the Last of Us game. If someone of you doesn't know it, it's about post-apocalypse, it's about virus, people turning into zombies, and those who survived try to survive. And there are two things that are important for me, as I believe. First, it's from the second part, the second from the first part. These two scenes are almost identical. The main character, a girl, goes to a big shopping center, to the arcade. She goes there with a friend, and she asks her to close the eyes and asks her to imagine that she is playing the arcade. In the second scene, the girl is going to a deserted park. She sits in a capsule, and her father gives her an opportunity to look at the launch of a spaceship, so she can watch it actually. And we have sound effects here, and I have decided to show this at the moment when there is a count 3, 2, 1, and then there is a special effect when her face is lit with orange color, as if she was in the spaceship. What's the problem here? The next slide, please. So what's the problem? Just for the sake of time, it is believed that video games take many things from films, and directors of games use many things from films, like suspense, for example, but video games are different from the films because you can do things instead of a character. You can move him here or there, and there can be different ends. You can turn right or turn left, and the end will be different. So what's the problem here? In the case of Last of Us, the trick they use when the girl closes her eyes and we can see, we have this opportunity to feel, to see what she feels or sees. This is something that a film doesn't have. A director has to show everything in a film. And next slide, please. The only film is Bergman's Persona, when two characters, one doesn't say anything, the other says only, and the character who is talking all the time says that once she went to the beach, met an acquaintance, then they met a man and they had sex. And a director should show the beach, the man, the sex, but Bergman doesn't show anything. It's a non-cinema trick.
And so there is such a trick, and let's take a look at the next slide, the movie Eyes Wide Shut. We have the same story here. So she, the character, tells the story how she wanted to cheat on his husband. And Kubrick also could go the way Bergman went, but Kubrick wants to show it, because when they have discussed, the wife and the husband have discussed it, and so Kubrick shows this scene as if she was dreaming. So this is a very short picture, and here we can see the lights and everything, but still we can see it in the screen, right? So Kubrick shows us to us. And if we return to The Last of Us, if we return to this image, so in the game, the players need to imagine it. And so this is the trick that comes not from the movies, but this comes from the literature. And so there is a special term for that. And, well, what I wanted to mention here is the trick that was created by Proust. And so also here, for the sake of time, very briefly, why I was telling all this. So the main book award in Russia, national bestseller, and it was the award was given to the book that proceeds from the games. So it wasn't the book who served as a baseline for the game, but just vice versa. There are numerous examples on how these things are interconnected and the borders are hidden. And if in the past we had this sequence, literature, movie, and then the game, now this has been demolished. And so let's take a look at it from this point of view. We have a classical distinction between languages, analytical and synthetic. So we have such analytical language as English, for example, and we have the special system, right? So, and we get the meaning of the phrase proceeding from its structure. So we first take a look at the structure and then understand what it means. But as I've mentioned, there are synthetic languages, such as Russian, for example. These languages are characterized by the way that the word or a word can be changed and the meaning can change simultaneously with the word. And so we also can say that we have analytical and synthetic narratives. So the English literature is a very good example of analytical narrative. First, there is a start, then the climax, and then the final. But also we have synthetic literature, such as the Chinese literature and also the War and Peace, for example. There are a lot of different characters, they're all interconnected. Let's take a look at the next slide. So traditionally, when we talk about the reality, we imagine it as a set of some facts and events that happen to us. And these facts and events can have some consequences or cannot have any of them. But when we tell a story, we want to make it align, right? So we want to make an order out of these facts. And so we also want some cause and effect structure. And this is a very normal analytical narrative. Just as in a movie, you have the start, then you have the climax and the final. So everything is on its own place. But when it comes to the games, here it works differently. When we talk about games, we can say that there is a synthetic narrative in here. What I mean here is that you never have a very clear final ending that would be right. You always have the opportunity to diverge, to make another decision and to come to another ending. Today, games look like as follows. A player has a set of opportunities how to proceed. Next slide, please. So, where was I leading at? A couple of years ago, perhaps it was a Yandex conference, and there was a speaker from Renaissance insuring company, and 10 years ago they conducted a research, and it showed that a contemporary person expects the same experience from the offline activities as he or she gets from the online one. So if you have a pleasant experience of buying books online, then you expect that when you come to a brick and mortar store, then you expect the same level of service and support. And step by step, we are coming to a situation when our expectations that we get online, in wider meaning here, I mean through video games, etc., we transfer this experience to offline. And here comes the question of cancel culture. In online, we can save at some point, we can come to an ending, and we can get back to the saved point and just go across another road. And the cancel culture looks like an opportunity to lose. Or you can just replay the situation that has led you to some kind of a situation. When we talk about the cancel culture, for example, you can get back to the past, you can cancel the event that happened, and then you can proceed to another future in which we are living now. And this future would probably be better than the present that is currently we live in. And the cancel culture works like that. This is kind of a game, perhaps, when we take something and we rewrite the past. If it's not the future, then what is that? Well, it would be good to finalize and sum up, but let's take a look at my last slide here. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Indeed, it's very interesting what you mentioned about layering different forms of experience and expectations. I'm a bit afraid of those people who are quite familiar with the games. Oh, this doesn't matter, actually. So, and from here, I would like to draw the bridge to back the new media. And I would like to pose the following question. A creator, a developer of algorithm or the format of a new media, this person probably imagines the way how a person, a player interacts with something. But the new media is not in a vacuum. It will be in an environment which is filled with the old media, and it all starts to add to each other or also to get into a conflict. And perhaps this will not go according to the plan of the creator. And especially this is important when we talk about a body. What Nikolai mentioned, at some point when we are in a mode of a simulation, in a mode of a game, but then our body comes. And this interaction between the new and the old, the virtual and the body, I believe that's very important. Right, it is important because when we talk about philosophy and the humanitarian conceptualizations that are working with the new and old media, as well as analyze the relations of a human being with an environment, of course here the body comes as some of a kind of a constant, and we can't get rid of that. Because essentially the philosophy of the 20th century goes along two directions. And here I would like just to offer a short introduction. A philosophical speech is always kind of an introduction, and I would also like to be a bit abstract here, and I would like to start with an introduction, and don't expect me to come to an answer here, but still a philosophy and the philosophical analysis of a human being is something that goes along two directions. On the one hand, this is the abundance or abandoning of the embodiment and the willingness to get rid of the body, the human body, as a kind of a medium that represents a person. We live through it, and we strive at distinguishing some constants with which we can work, those constants that are inherent in people. And here we have some very popular directions of research as posthumanism, new humanism, etc. So here people are striving at getting something unchangeable. And here this is not a sensation, because this is just a continuation of some classical philosophy. If we take a look at the ancient Greek, the ancient Chinese philosophy, then we would see the search of some structures of cognition, of knowledge, of thought. And they are quite separate from the body and from the body parts and our physiology in general. And here this search of something important tells us that what makes us human is not human naturally. And so there are different philosophers, Lebrassier or Gristani, they are referred to quite a lot. And these philosophers say that we should get these structures. And then here, from this, we can actually fill in such areas as artificial intelligence, the informatics, as well as neurobiology, for example. Because if we take a look at how all these researchers try to identify these important structures, then we will understand that they are working with some set of tools that are inherent in the theory of algorithms, artificial intelligence, etc. And so where does it lead us to? They try to conceptualize these capacities of people that at some point made a human being a subject that can speak and live and feel. And in this sense, all this search is aimed at abandoning or refusing the concept of a body as a zero point, ground point. And so when we talk about cybernetics and other ways to analyze the human being, this is one point how to address it. And the other way how to deal with it, and I actually support this way, is how indeed to deal with this body and embodiment. Because a body is something that is intermediary. And we cannot get rid of that, because when we talk about our social contacts, the use of all our interfaces and affordances, a lot of cognitive psychologists are talking about it. So the body is a medium for our experience. And there are different philosophical traditions. They're quite old-fashioned, such as phenomenology, for example. And today they're quite cross-bred, quite successfully, with the cognitive psychology and with artificial intelligence. Because they could be design research that takes into account the body, because all the patterns that are inherent in the cognitive psychology and psychology as it is, back in 1950s when it all just appeared, they were interpreted as some functional programs to embody the artificial intelligence. And this is aspect that is referred to the historians and researchers that deal with these areas. And so a lot of descriptions how the human cognition works, how our brain works. This is some kind of a cybernetic machine, and it all was done in such a way that would allow us to emulate that on some artificial unit. And so we understood that it didn't happen. And so here we can proceed, or we should proceed from something that will never happen. But when it comes to the research, then we should say that back in 1950s, when the first artificial intelligence development appeared and the prototypes of first artificial neural nets appeared, as well as the first description of a human brain got to the surface, then there was quite popular understanding and quite popular opinion among researchers that artificial intelligence will appear just in a decade, and it would be able to address all the tasks that a human being can address, but artificial intelligence will even be better. And this is a double trend, so to say, because on the one hand, it allows us to take a look at ourselves from another point. So we just view ourselves as thinking objects. This is about intuition, this is about introspective view on ourselves. So we have a body, we have social contacts, and we can reflect on ourselves, as well as we have different connotations, cultural, political, etc. And so this is quite simultaneous with the trends that are currently present in different areas of research, in the economics, in psychology, cognitive sciences, etc. So on the one hand, it allows us to look at ourselves from a different angle, but on the other side, it just provides us with a way how to cancel the whole humanity, because these sciences that were present during the past 10 or 15 years, this is just a recipe how we can cancel ourselves. And of course, this is connected to the fact that this category, a human being, is quite a full one, because when we talk about a human being, this is not just the person who is just born and that's it, but we should also be turned into human beings. Not all human beings are inherently people. And so this cancel culture, well, of course we can understand it, and we can also express some sympathy in here and agree. And I agree with this as well. But this idea of canceling the whole humanity, of course, this is a very important one, but now we should add to it some prospect. We should take a look at our experience. We should provide ourselves with a language, how to express all that. And I am, as a researcher, in different projects and different scenarios, I try to just mix these two prospects, or perspectives, better to say, the objective one and the subjective one. On the one hand, we try to emulate something on the artificial unit, so this is something that doesn't depend on the outer conditions such as policy or politics and others. But on the other hand, those units, as philosophers say, that could be multiplied on absolutely different carriers on the protein carriers and many, many others. And so the main task for the researchers is to combine those two perspectives that I mentioned. And here I believe that we already have some good grounds for that in the theory of media, because it has some specifics, such as it can apply all the principles and all the concepts that are being used to itself. And that's why Friedrich Kittler said that philosophy is a medium as well. It could be analyzed as a message that is conveyed in different media. This is connected to the linear writing, to the culture of reflection. So it is always about some inner monologue of the subject with itself. And so that's how we articulate this human reality. So to abandon the humanity, to abandon this retrospective viewpoint, this is not possible. And the media theory, this is quite an influential one, but this is a good tradition by William Flusser. And this is the idea of getting abstract. Because with some kind of philosophical gesture, he wants to cover the whole history of the technological development of humanity, to model across 4 steps how the humanity can abandon the body. And this is connected to the fact that first we should be separate from the world. We should go abstract. We should understand that I and the object with which I interact, some kind of an elementary interface with which I interconnect. This is the first step to getting abstract, to distinguishing between myself and the object with which I interact. And the next steps are the creation of writing, reading, calculating. And the final step here, and it actually took place quite long ago, this is about the creation of making the nature mathematical. And this is an idea that is not appreciated by the philosopher of the 20th century, because they believed that this is the first step to forgetting who we are, what is the world, because it would result in an abstract model of the world that would not be connected to our experience. And this idea that the world could be modeled with some set and kind of mathematical models or some images of the models that could be manipulated from the technological point of view, technological side, well, it came in the modern times. Because, well, they said that the nature is the book that is written in the language of math. And so this is actually the future that came to us long ago. Currently, we are just going through this endless iteration of these old principles. And here, I believe it would be quite interesting to take a look at the history and some events that happened in the past that will be the model of our future. And this is a different approach to our memory, to our collective appreciation and view. So it just means that our future has already happened, but it is in the past. A lot of philosophers say that the philosophy of the 20th century appeared in the 19th. The philosophy of the science, people were quite enthusiastic about that back in the 19th century. But on the other hand, we can also say that a lot of models that are still deferred, for example, artificial intelligence, it will appear in the future, but still it dictates us some infrastructure from the future. And here, this is a very dubious approach to the time. And so for the sake of saving the time, I would like to say that we should analyze the stories in our past. And just a couple of examples that I would like to give you from the Soviet history.
Since they interestingly disclose the utopian expectations, because utopia turns out to be dystopia, and those of you who have watched the new film devoted to on Aldous Huxley's work, it is a dystopia where we have nothing private, when all Our thoughts are not ours. We are always being monitored by some observer. It is, by the way, a very important thing from cybernetics, because everything that is said about a system, about a human body, is said by an observer. Who is this observer? Is he or she or it some device, a computer? And now philosophers, it is a device, it's a computer that perceives a human being as an object. So there has been a number of interesting cases, and one of the most interesting one was the research made by engineers, cybernetics, psychologists, those who were followers of Mr. Pavlov, Mr. Bekhterev. So they tried to research telepathy. This is quite a strange phenomenon, but today we have spoken about the streaming of thoughts, and this is actually what we are aspiring to. I have read a research that was published 4 years back about reading the electromagnetic field of our brain and the possibility of transmitting signals between two different brains. This is actually telepathy, from the point of view of those scientists at least. But this is actually the case that when researchers used metaphors to describe the process of thinking, they worked using cybernetics conceptual apparatus. So they're talking about electromagnetic signal that was transmitted from one brain to another, and they said that this information could be quantified within the theory of information, and it could be mathematically described. They said that this information can be intercepted with different technological devices. They tried to make them, but they failed. But what is interesting here, actually, it's not the fact that the research took place, but the way they interpreted this research. They said that the studying of telepathy, of transmitting thoughts, of transferring thoughts and of information, which is a basic notion, it's natural philosophy actually. So the transmission of information will allow us to reach a utopian feeling, and utopia turns into dystopia, and those people who were communists, by the way, who were aware of that stage of technological progress, so they thought that the use of this notion would allow them to create good, decent people. But evidently, such a transition to the good society without privacy, without bad thoughts, without any deviations, would make a person a cyborg, will be just an appendix to the brain, a cybernetic device, a machine, a set of discrete elements brought together by some links. This is about the double nature of the languages of description, because the human being is both a subject and an object. I can go on for ages, but now I would like to say, just to wrap up, that I believe we should take into account this double nature of perspective. We should describe the process of digital transformation, but we should take into account that this is the continuation of the basic immanent patterns that are inherent to us, to human societies. Thank you. Thank you, Maxim. And quite interestingly, the strive to cancel yourself is one of the patterns, actually, and it is interestingly correlated with the idea of the death of art, which we have always had. The art brings to naught what we used to have, what we have now, hoping that in the future there will be something else, something different. Maybe we could have looked at the media from the following point of view. They could be tomorrow to replace yesterday, but yesterday will do something to fight back. Stanislav, what do you think about the death of art? Is it going to die
Есть такое ощущение,
on and on?
что то, что
Well, you
называется
know,
смертью искусства, это есть его жизнь.
some people think that the death of art is actually the life of art.
Расширенный вариант жизни, да, который
It's
включает
like an extended
постоянное
version of
умирание,
life with its infinite deaths and resurrection, or the imitation of resurrection
идея смерти искусства, она
arising from the ashes. The idea of the death of art is stipulated by the fact that
то есть вот в
art
традиции
does exist.
картине мира
Before modernism,
искусство с большой буквы не существует. Существует искусство
there was no art
вырезать алтарь,
from the big A art. So people made altars, made icons, they cooked porridge, they made a table. So then some types of art were made, high art, others were lower art, and the French Revolution and the Kant ideas
прямое следствие этой идеи — это, конечно,
brought
поиск
us
смысла искусства. А уже когда
to
речь
the need to
заходит о
search
поиске
for
смысла,
the
до
meaning
идеи
behind
смерти,
art. And when we are thinking about meaning
поэтому
of
вот так
something,
в 19
we
век он
approach
смысл
the notion of
искусства
death. So when
не
we,
в
in the
отказе там тональной живописи,
20th century, have
и так далее.
tried to
И,
search for
довольно
the
быстро,
meaning
в
behind the
течение
different
буквально
artistic
десятилетий,
objects,
1920-е или в конце 10-х годов, возникают представления, что
we
все ресурсы этот он
understood that there was nothing left,
классические произведения, о которых
and we went back to the classic
занятиях тех, кто
art,
хочет заниматься современным искусством, да, ready-made Дюшана, работы Малевича,
ready-made Duchamp,
и так далее.
Malevich's
Первый
work,
вариант смерти
Rodchenko's
искусства,
work.
который на самом деле
It is the
очень связан, как и в наше время,
first version of the death of art, which is closely connected with the transformation of a human being, the death of human being that we have spoken since the 1960s. A century ago, people did not speak about the death of a human being. Back then, people thought about the birth of a human being that had different manifestations, like from Platonov's, for example, works or Malevich's works, and technologically, this is one of the versions of transformation that we can call now the death of a human being. So we are more radical about this than people 100 years ago. And if we speak about corporeality, an important question arises that despite the loss of reality, referring to William Fluss, this is actually what I have just said, we have come to the culture that draws upon figures, digits, 4 digital, for example, space, 3D, 4D, but still there is no death of a human body, although for many years researchers speak about this. However, the human body does not go into thin air, it still exists. And the Middle Ages and the modern times thought that our conscience is some inner world, it is inside us, inside the human brain or somewhere, this is the most valuable thing because it's soul that was thought to be that used to be thought as something that wouldn't die. And what is soul now? It's something that won't die, and a human being, a body, is just a shell where the soul resides. And after the body dies, the soul will have its real life. Now we do not speak about the fact that the body dies. On the contrary, it is something precious. It's something we value. It is unique, and people attend to it. There are big industries to make everything so that our bodies won't die, so to say, paradoxically though. And the soul attends to highly precious bodies. So these are interesting processes that we have faced recently. They are about the changes of what we think to be a human being, art, and I think there will be many interesting twists and turns in the future. Yes, I understand. We speak about body, about community, we speak about the presence. Margarita, I think you have spoken about that when you said some words about the project, the privilege of presence, that was called. So the presence turns out to be a medium, a channel through which we can get access to something that would be given to us virtually. Margarita, could you probably elaborate on this privilege of presence project? Well, I can, but I'm not going to say about it now. I'd rather respond to what I have just heard. You can read my essay, by the way. You can Google it, and you will learn much more from it. I think we have other more interesting questions to discuss now, because there will always be privileges. We have such notions as the fact that our bodies didn't have the same access to services that exist now. So, Denis, I have a question to you. You said about naked people. I think this is an interesting question. You cited Guerrilla Girls, if I'm not mistaken. It's not actually about why there are so many naked women, but why there are so few women among artists, among producers. But the question that I'm concerned with is actually the ideas and technologies connection. Many of us have spoken about it today. Why is there a certain delay in the propagation of ideas? Maxim said that the philosophy of the 20th century was invented or just came about in the 19th century, and he spoke about canonization, and there are more women who voice their ideas among minorities. Maybe in the future more women will speak out. And it seems to me that an important question is how do these delays have a connection with theories? how theory and practice, do theory and practice connect? Actually, I am like looking at TV show. I have tried to guess who was the philosopher. It was actually very difficult to understand who dealt with what. I'm indeed interested in what you can say about it. Probably I shall start about the delay. As the colleagues have said, we are still connected to our bodies and nothing will change. Ideas come with generations. Now we have young generation for which the ideas of diversity, biodiversity, multiculturalism will grow up in 15 years. They will become adults, they will become socially and financially active, politically active as well, and they will change the world to fit their own ideas. This idea will be in the air. No one will question them, and if you do, you will be treated impartially as retrograde, as a with quite conservative ideas, and it doesn't matter how fast our internet is, how much we communicate. We are connected with our bodies. We are social beings, and if everyone around you thinks that this is good and this is bad, in most cases we are quite comfortable with this. We do adapt. We join the majority, and this is how it works.
And as to the small question, that wasn't actually a reference, so we are quite pressed for time, so I have to be very brief in here. It wasn't about saying that, well, there are a lot of naked women in our museums. Well, here we have to explain that the problem is the common everywhere, because when it comes to the naked male bodies and pictures, it's very hard to objectify them. Because when, for example, you come to Hermitage or to Vatican, well, the story is quite a different one from the naked female bodies. So feminism is quite a large concept. We can't get a particular pattern and say you should do this and you should not do that. So just to save some time, we put it as kind of a term, but the fact is there are some changes in the museums, and they are connected to the anti-Russian patterns and rhetoric, anti-feminism rhetoric, etc. And so this is just in the air. For example, today you can go to the museum and there are some very famous paintings that have naked women on them. But tomorrow you can come to the museum and you will not see them anymore. This is just as a radiation, so you can't feel it, but you can feel that it influences you. So, right, there was a question about this problem with the naked women paintings. And to follow on Margarita's question, the speed of our changes and the speed of our adaptations in media and in our information space, what do you think about it? Well, as a practitioner, here actually I feel a bit out of league. So I can proceed from the experience that I get from those models with which I work. And I want the person who makes the decision in these models, I want this person to live through the consequences of the decisions made as fully as possible. And when I currently work with students and when I see which challenges can a game pose to a player, then I think that to make the play emotionally involved, since today we also talk about the art and how it should adapt to these new realities as well as the new challenges that are posed by the digitalization as well as the new volumes and the new boundaries that are being expanded quite a lot. When we talk about and think about the challenges that are posed to our brains, then we can come to a conclusion that today, when we develop these new artistic models, they are artistically oriented and they carry some poetic meaning. Well, of course, we not talk about games in such a way quite often, but still games do have some poetic meanings, and we can also see some features that have been mentioned by such scientists like Veselovsky and others. And so when we take a look from this point of view, then we can understand that a player, a person, has a very narrow channel of appreciation, of perceptance. Because if we analyze and take a look at the game as not just a virtual entertainment tool, but as a whole environment and field, as the whole comprehensive model, then our player, our reader, is a subject, and we want to communicate a message that has been created by the author. And contrary to some other media, there is some specific. What I mean here is that a player, as opposed to a person in the cinema or to a reader, a gamer, a player, constantly makes decisions. And now let's just expand this experience and transfer it from games to our reality, or also let's expand our vision to the internet. And as you've correctly mentioned, to some extent, our reality is also a game, and sometimes there is a kind of a hidden boundary between the reality and the game. And so a gamer makes the decisions, and he or she actually has to put a lot of energy in that. And sometimes we do not understand that we are doing something. Our hands and fingers are constantly moving, and we are moving through this artificial environment, space. Different channels of our perception are quite occupied, such as our ears, our eyes, also the tempo and the rhythm. While perhaps this term is more inherent in choreography and dancing, it's more widely used when we talk about some performance and theater. But for a game, the channel of tempo and the rhythm, readjusting the tempo of decision-making, readjusting the speed with which the gamer can read some information and get it. So, as has already been mentioned, a gamer is absolutely unexpected in here, uncertain. We cannot forecast what the player will do, where he or she will go, and from all the channels, the player should get the equal volume of information. And we are overwhelmed with the information, and this results in our conscious activity, because the designers of the games should organize the reality in such a way that a gamer receives the channel or the information from all the channels to make the human being, the player, act accordingly. And so this absolute overwhelming with information, and this results in the narrowing of our channels of perception. And to make it an artistic act and to make this have a semiotic structure because, well, in games consist of some signs, and we just operate against all the signs. And to communicate a message to a player against this backdrop of semiotic model, we should take into account the speed of perceptance. We should take into account the narrow channel through which a player can think through the decisions, think through the information that has been delivered to the player. And here comes the issue of responsibility, of liability. This is very important for our medium. And we, as the directors, we are obliged to work with this reality. What I mean here is a very high speed, a lot of information. We have the interconnection between these two channels or two factors, such as the narrow channel as well as the widened space and the enormous quantity of channels, and we have to build our message and communicate it to the player proceeding from all this. So this is the reality. We just have to go with the wind. We have to set the course, taking into account all the aspects. Well, I believe that we've mentioned a lot of factors with which we have to live, and since we've already talked a lot today, and I believe that it's quite time to not to sum up exactly, but just to strike some balance and to build the platform for our future discussions. For all this, I want to ask quite a short but provocative question to you, Maxim, to you as the expert in theory of newest and old media. If we talk about the artistic aspect of all this, how would you describe it? I mean, how would you describe the media of the future that would be here, will be here in 100 years? Well, it's quite difficult to answer. I'm not good at forecasting, but I believe that the most promising areas of the future and the development are those that are connected to our brain. This is the plastic object of ours, and the future will be connected to unleashing the potentials that we have. And I believe that the trajectory of the human development, as well as the human being as an engineering object that is being manipulated, I think that will proceed from discovering our capabilities of our brain. And here we probably will talk about enhancing the whole context, the media, the technologies, also some protocols of enhanced cognition. And here I believe that we'll be going towards unleashing the brain's potential as a distributed system inside this cloud unit that has the brain, the body, as well as the material culture. I believe that it all will be interconnected and quite promising. Alexander, can I also specify a bit? Yes. So this medium in 100 years that you mentioned, currently we are in a situation when we have a lot of media, and for example, we have opera, which exists in parallel with books, radio, and TV. It all persists. Like 100 years pass. So what? Okay, something happens with our brain, but all the rest will be cancelled. Will we go to one TV center and we will just all be sitting there? Will we have any kind of diversity? Will we have just TV and that's all? Well, I believe that this could be quite inclusive, and we can work with different media, and we don't have to cancel all the media that have already been present. And so there is an idea of a remediation. This is about the reiteration and replaying of new media, but the principle of work persists. It is the same. And enhanced neurophysiological vision is about inclusion of all the media and success stories that were in the past. So we will focus on the brain and the protocols, how to work with it, but it doesn't mean canceling all other discoveries and successes that were made in our science and culture. So we will see. I do hope that the care that we take of our bodies will allow us to live another 100 years, but we also do believe and hope that in a year we will once again be involved in the Ars Electronica festival. We will once again take a look at the interconnection between culture, the technologies, arts, how it's all described and thought over. And I do hope that already in a year we will have some food for discussion, and we will continue to project and forecast. Thank you for the discussion. Thank you, dear audience. Thank you.
Спасибо вам огромное.